In this video, we're going to be ranking the Game of Thrones books from worst to best. And the criteria for this list will be, we're going to be ranking the books in terms of enjoyment. Starting up with number 5, A Feast for Crows. I gave this book an 8 out of 10 in terms of enjoyment. Even though this book is last on this list, it's still a very good book. We're introduced to Dorne, which I think is the best part about this book. We have the King's Moot. We're introduced to Old Town. We see Arya in the House of Black and White. We even have Elaine Stone, which is Sansa Stark. But there is some bad in this book, mainly being Brienne of Tarth. She is probably one of the worst characters of all time. Having to read the chapters about Brienne is agony. For some reason, she is such a boring character. Even though there's lots of action in her chapters, it's just really hard to read it and get through it, and it really slows the whole book down. There's also parts about Jaime and Cersei, which I thought were really boring as well. Not as good as the other books, and because of that, the score gets brought down a little bit. Number 4, A Dance with Dragons. I gave this book a 9 out of 10 in terms of enjoyment. Even though this book has a high score, I still feel like it could have given a lot more. We have the chapters with Daenerys in Slaver's Bay, which is easily the best part of this book. Everything that goes down in Essos is epic, and it's just awesome to read. We also have chapters where we find out there are people who have mastered walking, which was cool. We even have chapters with Barristan Selmy, which were just exceptional. The downside to this book were chapters with Tyrion Lannister. He is so annoying in this book. Not quite as bad as Brienne, but still, it's tough to read. There are small sections that were interesting with Tyrion, but for the most part, it was terrible. Also, the chapters with the Iron Islands were quite bad as well. It wasn't really interesting to read, and that brings down the score a bit. Number 3, A Game of Thrones. I gave this book a 10 out of 10 in terms of enjoyment. This book is a good introduction to the series. We really see the differences between all the characters. For example, Arya is adventurous, and Sansa is more like a lady. Jon Snow feels like an outcast, but so does Arya. That's why they're so close. Theon Greyjoy is mischievous. But the really interesting parts were we find out Lord Varys knows Catelyn Stark is going to King's Landing. Because of his network of spies, he knew that she was coming, and that was interesting. And also Tyrion's conversation with Bronn. We find out how smart Tyrion really is. He's always 10 steps ahead of the game, and that was exceptional. Number 2, A Clash of Kings. I gave this book a 13 out of 10 in terms of enjoyment. That does seem ridiculous. Like, how can you give this kind of score? But I feel like this book deserves it. It's one of the best books in the series. We find out that Stannis Baratheon and his family are seen as a joke in Westeros. That is until they organize an assault on King's Landing. I also think that Stannis Baratheon is one of the funniest characters in the series. We see what's beyond the wall. We have the War of the Five Kings. And we're introduced to Qarth, the center of the world. Number 1, A Storm of Swords. I gave this book a 17 out of 10. Now, this rating is even more ridiculous than the last one, but this is the best book in the series. I also think that Game of Thrones is the best at introducing new characters. We're introduced to Jaime Lannister, and we get to see things from his point of view, and why he does the things he does. We also have the Red Wedding, Slaver's Bay, and the Purple Wedding. Even the parts of this book that seem dull are actually really interesting. The best example of this is when we have Jaime Lannister, Brienne of Tarth, and Roose Bolton sitting at a table, having dinner. Jaime says to Roose, "What's going to happen when my father sees I've lost a hand?" Roose Bolton says, "That's a problem. Don't tell him it was me." In Jaime's head, he's thinking, I kind of know what's going on, but what about Brienne? She has no idea. And it's even times like this that, the game is always being played. And that's about it.